Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
Welcome back, my friends, to Courageous Conversations. I'm Dr. Peter Weinstein, and we very much appreciate those of you who take the time and energy to listen to us ramble on about social, political, veterinary, and other issues. Dr. Nelson, always great to see you.
It's a pleasure to see you, Peter, and it's a pleasure to have another chance to ramble on these issues. And I too want to thank our listeners for putting up with us once again. We want to thank Nationwide for supporting us, and we want to thank Nicole Nelson for producing our segments. What's on your mind today, Dr. Weinstein?
Well, prior to our call, we had a conversation, and we were talking about the upcoming election and some of the things that we've got in the next days that are left. And you mentioned an interesting effect, and I've heard of different effects, but I hadn't heard of this one. And you mentioned that you had a concern about the Hillary Clinton effect. And so I'm curious, because I Googled it and I didn't see the Hillary Clinton effect anywhere. What's bugging you about the Hillary Clinton effect with the current candidates that we've got running for the presidential position?
Thanks for throwing me under the bus, by the way.
I'll back it up and run you over later.
Yes, but to put it in a more striking perspective here, we were discussing the atmosphere of the election and how it has changed since Joe Biden withdrew, how quickly Kamala Harris has solidified her support within the Democratic confines and being named as a as the presumptive nominee for the party. Frankly, if nothing else, this has shown that France may have something in limiting a campaign to just 6 weeks, because it's refreshing to have gone through all this as short as we did to at least have a nominee and a vice presidential nominee that we can at least focus on. The changes that it has elicited in the political stream is exciting, if nothing else. However, I am still concerned about those people that just can't vote for a woman for president. And I realize that Hillary Clinton carried a lot of baggage for a lot of different reasons. And it may be that she just had some really emotional reactions to her candidacy as a result of her career and the things that she did. But there is one thing that is patently clear to me, and that is that she was clearly the most qualified person to ever run for president, if you looked at qualifications. Anyway, my concern is that slice of the electorate that just can't get past sexism. Your response was, or racism. And I think in this particular case, sexism predominates. Not that there will be some votes lost based on racism as well, but that's a given regardless of the electorate.
In 2024, with women's rights and women's bodies being such a dominant cause for concern and discussion, in many ways, having a woman candidate is an important role in terms of helping address the issues of women's rights and women's rights to control their bodies. I'm less concerned about the gender as much as the leadership skills and the qualifications of the candidates. And yes, Hillary Clinton was a highly skilled individual, Secretary of State, was previous in the White House as the First Lady and a variety of other roles, senator, et cetera. And I think she would have been a great candidate. There was a lot of effort towards the end that did her in, both internal mistakes that she made in terms of things that she said, and external influencers through things that happened in the last few weeks of the campaign. I just find it very refreshing in many ways that we're not having a deja vu of 2020. I think that 2020 was exhausting enough to go through, and having two candidates that were running at that point in time. So to have this change in dynamics has been somewhat refreshing. I think it's brought some energy to the politics. I think that a large portion of the American population is happy to see some level of change in the candidates that are out there. I do have concerns about sexism. I have concerns about racism, but what's been interesting, at least in watching the political rhetoric that's been out there, there has been less addressed that Kamala Harris is a woman and more addressed that Kamala Harris is either black or Indian or unsure whether she's black or Indian.
Not for lack of trying.
Well, I mean, I haven't heard a directed comment that, do you really want a woman as president, or do you want somebody whose gender is uncertain? I mean, it was been very specific in a lot of the targeting.
I meant about the racism.
Yeah.
part.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, Trump did try to make that an issue. He did say, I don't know if you know, but I thought we discussed this earlier, but at one point, he did make the comment that he didn't know if Kamala was black or Asian. He made a poor attempt to even question the name Harris.
Right.
I don't know how you make an issue out of the name Harris, but he claims that he suddenly discovered that she was black.
Yeah.
And he blames her for that. You know, it didn't go over very well because Kamala Harris has been Kamala Harris throughout her career, and she's never changed anything. You know, she has been true to her heritage on both sides of the spectrum. It just goes to show you the divisiveness instead of promoting his own policies.
Wait a second. Promoting what policies? I haven't seen a freaking policy discussed at all.
Okay, that's my point.
Yeah. So explanation point. We're not running a campaign on, well, I think Kamala has done a good job of bringing policies to the fore. I'm not sure that her opponent has been politicking on policies, maybe anti-policies.
Yes, or promoting promises of tax cuts for people who will donate to their campaign, you know, or other types of economic promises for people who will donate to their campaign, or promoting other divisive and selfish proclamations that remind us of what we used to be, and promises to go back to those times.
So I was watching last night, because I just got back, The Daily Show with Jon Stewart from Monday night. And it was interesting because he used side-by-side snippets from the Republican candidate in his campaign against Biden and his snippets in his campaign against Harris. And it is the same verbiage with a different target.
Yes, I saw that too.
So there is not anything new being used to address issues, gender, race, even policy. It's just the ongoing verbal attacks at the person. So, you know, as you were talking about sexism and racism, really we're talking about a third of the American population that is up for influence. I would suggest that there's about a third of the American voters that are strongly going to vote red. There's a third that are strongly going to vote blue, no matter who the candidate is. And then there's that middle population that is to whom both candidates are addressing.
That's true. I think that's about right. It's a little more than a third for each, but still, there's about 10% of the population that's left undecided, and 10% of the population is where the battle remains and will determine the election. 10 to 12 or 13%, something like that. The thing that I've noted the most was we have the problem of categorizing issues or anything. It's not just blatant racism or sexism or economic conservatism that seems to be the issue. It is negative strategy that pervades whatever criticism the former president chooses to promote. Because in that list of comparisons, he says both of them, both the present president and the present vice president, are too dumb to create policies, appropriate policies, or too dumb to debate, or too dumb. I mean, and he uses the word dumb as if when someone has won as many elections as Biden has, it's hard to attack his intellect. When someone has graduated from law school and passed the bar exam and become an attorney general of the state of California, it's hard to question that person's intellect unless you have the brazenness to be in a insulated arena with nobody but people who are raising red cards at you so that you can say what you want and nobody will counter you. I was watching The Last Word last night, and the host of that show was incensed by the fact that the media has been cowered by the former president, that they don't ask him questions. They don't ask him follow-up questions because they know if they do, and if they press to try to get an answer, the way they press anybody else, they would be barred from his media events, or he would accuse them of being nasty. The differences between the way they treat Trump and the way they treat Biden, he showed that. He showed how Biden and Biden's press conferences and Biden's press secretary and Kamala Harris, the press are all over them. Won't even give them a chance to talk, hardly. They ask the question and then they provide additional information before they can even answer the question, right? But yet, Trump doesn't even answer the question. He goes all around the question, and then there's no follow-up and say, well, you didn't answer my question. Let me ask it again. But out of fear that they may be barred from the next one if they press too hard, they don't do that. That is the first step toward autocracy because they're doing this out of fear and they don't know it. They don't recognize it. And that is the first step towards suppression of thought, when I have to suppress my reactions.
Well, that's what they want. That's what that side of the ledger wants. I want to get back to the gender side for just a second. Germany, France, Canada, the UK, and Israel, just thinking about it, have all had women leaders at some point in time. Maybe one, maybe two, maybe multiple.
Australia,
New Zealand. We may be one of the slowest to adopt. Excuse me?
Maybe.
Well, we are. Okay, I'm trying to dance down the middle of the road. We are one of the slowest to adopt and accept female leadership. It's about time. And especially if you look at what we should be looking at, which is qualifications of candidates. We have had some really good qualified candidates. And I actually remember, because that's how old I am, Shirley Chisholm running for president back in the 70s, I want to believe. So what is it about? And I believe that the American population is just a tad to the 50.1% women, 49.9% men, something to that effect. But why do you think it's taking so long was Pelosi the first woman who was the chair of the House?
As far as I know, yes.
Have we had a chair of the Senate that was a woman?
As far as I know, no.
So what the hell's taken so long?
Come on. That was a rhetorical question, right?
Absolutely. It was rhetorical and ridiculous, but I asked it anyhow.
Yes, I understand. Yeah. I mean, you act as if you didn't grow up in America.
Sometimes I wonder.
I mean, Look, as great as America is, it has its warts. As great as America is, one of the reasons for its greatness is its entrenched processes, its entrenched biases. It's like moving a cruise ship. It takes forever to make it turn. I get frustrated when people ask simple questions like that and as if they didn't understand the impact of social structure. Is a manifestation of caveman relations. The strongest dictated law. And on average, and without the rule of law, the strongest will always prevail, even against those, or particularly against those who aren't able to fight back physically. But when we start submitting to the rule of law, and when law is based on fairness, we can begin to attack those biases. Without getting to a social studies analysis, let's just say that a paternalistic nation is loath to change. Anytime even slavery was adulterated with paternalism. They ended up during the slave period, the period of enslavement of African Americans in the South, they had to change inheritance laws for slaves in order to protect slave owners who were promulgating their slave population by raping they had to change their laws so that inheritance followed the maternal order in those type of relationships, so that mulattoes did not have legal access to their father's inheritance. When it becomes that deep, when those type of principles become that deeply entrenched in a nation's psyche, you don't need to ask why it takes so long for us to be able to trust or select leadership of another sex.
It's interesting because if you look at the monarchies that ruled Europe back 300-400 years ago, and even in many cases in a much more figurehead fashion in the present, they had queens.
Yes, but even then, when they had queens, those queens were not chosen to be leaders. Those queens that may have been monarchs ended up becoming monarchs because of the death of the male, or they happened to be strong enough to retain their reign despite not having a prince as an heir. In most cases, however, even those queens that were leaders that had reign hid behind the strength of a prince that was just not of age yet.
All right. Well, we've been talking about the past, and let's start thinking about the future, because isn't it time? I shouldn't say what I'm about to say. Isn't it a time we start to think about the future and change and a different way of looking at things than we have for the last 150 or 200 years? Why is it so hard to look at things differently?
Well, once again, you're boiling everything down to individual elements, and you're forgetting the way a democracy works. The simple answer is this is nothing new. We do think about it. We even discuss it. Whether it permeates the ether, the democratic ether or not, depends on the communicator. There was a time when we were challenged to think of not what the country can do for us, but what we can do for the country. This is a callback to that type of rhetoric, right? And we're going to have a pendulum that's going to swing back and forth. I'm always promoting, let's take care of our grandchildren. Now, is that a selfish approach, or is that a more societal based approach? But I believe that what's good for my grandchildren is good for your grandchildren. I may have some specific ideas about my grandchildren and my experiences that may be somewhat different, but that's what a democratic process allows us to even out, when the democratic process is fair. But when you won't let me vote because you close my because you won't allow a poll to open in my neighborhood, and you add half an hour to for me to travel to a poll, and I don't get off until 5 and it closes at 7. All of a sudden there are other ways of being unfair. And so the simple answer to your question is not the simple answer to, is not the simple solution to our problems.
That got us both quiet. It's just maybe I'm progressive enough. Progressive is an adjective, not as a political statement. Maybe I'm progressive enough to recognize that change is good and that it's not a gender-based decision, it's a candidate-based decision. We have a huge disparity in female CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies. I think there's probably 10% of CEOs from that standpoint that are women. Isn't it, again, it's a rhetorical question, but it's a question. What is it going to take to start to make the changes? Women CEOs run 10% of Fortune 500 companies. So what is it going to take to start to look as a country for common good, the common good? And maybe this is part of this chasm that we've been talking about, that we really don't look for common good. We look for individual good that's based upon which side of the canyon you're on.
Yeah, I can answer that. I love the way you pull these statistics out, just this, and throw them out there as if they describe the situation in and of itself. I mean, we just finished talking about our paternalistic society and how we got here. So I'm not surprised that sexism has resulted in a minority of females in the world of CEOs. And it's going to take time. We have the same problem with veterinary medicine. The leadership within veterinary medicine is predominantly white males, but that is by design. That is by past design. And yet it is changing. It will take time to change. I'm not asking anybody to be patient. I'm not asking anybody, and we will make those decisions based on not just qualifications. We will make those decisions also by an overwhelming shift in numbers of people that populate the veterinary profession. But that does not dismiss the fact that in the 50s and 60s, females were almost unilaterally barred to enter the profession. They were discouraged through societal pressures not to become veterinarians, to the point that when they interviewed to go to vet school, they were ridiculed and told and asked questions that were imbecilic by today's standards. You know, I had many female colleagues who were asked in an interview, honey, you look really kind of frail. How are you going to throw a cow? As if men of the same stature could easily do it. When we all know that it's all about leverage and fulcrums and ropes when you want to throw a cow, you know, but those are the kinds of questions that they got that made them question whether or not made a lot of women who discouraged a lot of women from even entering the profession or trying to enter the profession. And that doesn't say anything about the women that ended up getting into vet school and what they had to survive while in vet school, right? And so you can apply that to any industry. And that's why there's only 10% CEOs. That's what the glass ceiling is all about.
All right. Well, we started this conversation with the Hillary Clinton effect and the politics of the US and the concern regarding the next days with a Black woman candidate running in an environment that is somewhat biased or paternalistic, as you said, and the concerns about what that outcome will look like. My hope is whether the woman candidate was a Republican, whether the woman candidate was a Democrat, is that we would be choosing the best candidate that has been adopted for the position. And if that happens to be a woman, all the power to her and all the power to us as a country to start progressing forward in a day and age where forward progress is really where we should be looking. So I'm hoping that the Hillary Clinton effect and the Obama effect, which we didn't even talk about, do not play a role in the choosing of our next president as much as the qualifications of the candidate. But maybe I'm a little bit rose-colored glasses half full in this conversation.
No, you're not. First of all, I want to say that I thought this was an important conversation to have on the effect of sexism, and unfortunately, we could not avoid racism because of the race of the female candidate or the races of the female candidate. It still bothers me, however, that when we think of racism in this regard, we only think about her Black heritage, not her Asian heritage. And I submit that the racism would be against both, although I recognize that the racism is much more focused against her Black heritage, which is a whole nother conversation. But I do want to remind both of us that we're talking about two males talking about sexism who are beneficiaries of that sexism, and that what's missing in this conversation is the perspective from a female, and that we might want to revisit this issue with some guests in the future to discuss, to have a deeper, more robust discussion. And I'm sure we would come out on the short end of that discussion.
That will truly be a courageous conversation. But as for this courageous conversation, it's time to bring it home. Thank you, Phil, for stimulating and irritating, as always, our conversation. Thank you to Nationwide and to Nicole. Maybe we should bring Nicole in as the female, because then she could reduce this to sound like she sounds even better. It is an interesting conversation. We do seek those people who'd like to be a part of that type of conversation going forward. So, Phil, you want to bring it home?
Sure, no problem. Again, we want to thank Nationwide for supporting us. We want to thank our listeners, all 12 of you who decided to listen to this podcast. We want to encourage you to continue to challenge yourself when it comes to these type of issues, and to seek others who have different opinions and to seek those different perspectives. Once again, thank you for listening to us, and we look forward to our next chat.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.